everybody. Good morning. I hope you got your cup of coffee. I'm really glad you could make it today. Last week we talked about, should I write a book myself? Like, should I go out and write this thing? Because I've got some friends or family or my boss even that said, you should write a book. Well, this morning I'm going to talk about the team you're going to need if you actually want to take something to print. Now, if you go the traditional publishing route, it's a whole different deal. And I really don't have experience with that. I'm a self-published author of the Towers of Light series. This is Light of Mine, book one of my series. Noticed Mom's Choice, mom approved. There's 4 books in the series today, and I'm continuing to write. I've got a 5th one that's in process today, right now, and my team is active. So I'm going to be talking about a team. But you know who else had a team? Han Solo had a team. I don't know if you saw the deleted scenes from Return of the Jedi, but I caught one where Han, Leia, Chewie, and C-3PO, they were in the Millennium Falcon, and they were getting ready to blast off. And Han asked 3PO, he says, hey, give me a 30-second countdown. Well, 3PO's like, okay, 30, 28, 26. And Han's like, stop skipping numbers, Buckethead. And 3PO answers, but sir, you told me never to tell you the odds. Sorry, but the dad jokes, it's just part of who I am. But it's important, brings up the most important part of doing anything in writing is do you have some critique partners? Do you have some people that are willing to tell you that was horrible, like that joke? I think that's one of the things that I was missing when I first started out writing was I didn't really have critique partners. I didn't have friends. I had some friends that looked at it, but they weren't writers. They weren't concerned with writing or trying to write well. They were just friends of mine looking at stuff. Where a critique partner is somebody that you can have on your team that's going to help you really dig into the story. They're going to go, that's inconsistent. Or, hey, you're an old dude and a 12-year-old girl would never act that way, right? Like those are the kind of people you want in your life. And you can find critique partners, and there's local writing groups and things like that. But for me, I found my critique partner in professional associations. For self-published authors, there's a lot of them out there that are specific. So you have the Independent Book Publishers Association. Since I'm a Christian writer, I have the Christian Indie Publishing Association. These two groups get together with overall large group meetings and conferences, but they also have like mastermind groups you can join that get you those critique partners you need to be able to more effectively write the story. But once you've got something writing, you're really moving along. You've got a friend that's helping you out. Maybe you've built a collection of people. The next thing you need on your list is a coach or a mentor. And I say that because the big difference between your critique partners and coaches and mentors is typically your critique partners are not really that much farther along in their writing journey than you are, right? In a lot of cases, at least in my experience, most of the writers I've been working with kind of started at the same time I did, or maybe had been working on the same project for years, but didn't get serious about it until I did. So a lot of times your critique partners just don't have any experience, where a mentor is going to have a lot of experience. And so that was one of the things I was really fortunate early on to get a mentor, was also an editor. And we'll talk about editing in a minute. But I've had a lot of different mentors along the way. And so it's important. One of my favorite things I learned from a mentor who didn't even realize she was being my mentor at the time, maybe, was she was basically teaching a class, and she said, one of the problems with self-published authors is they ask for advice. They say, hey, could you help me understand how to do X or Y, or help me to do this thing or learn about a thing. And then the person they ask advice from says, here's the advice, do this thing. And then they don't do it. So I think the really important part about working with a mentor or coach is if they say, you need to adjust X or Y, you probably should at least try to adjust X or Y before you go off somewhere else. So when I look at my own journey, that was a big deal for me. Like there was a point in this where this mentor said, you really need to rethink your life. Like, not that you couldn't write, or not that it couldn't be a thing, but just the approach I was taking was all wrong. And I really need to take a step back. And so, take a break, like take a month off or something, do something else for a while and come back to it. Maybe you'll have a better idea what to do. And that was exactly the case. So definitely, if you get a writing coach or mentor, you want it to be somebody that's going to tell you truthfully from experience, hey, this is, you should stop, or maybe you should go, like someone that can also push you along. So one of the big things I got after that break was I started really looking into an editor. And one of the things about editing is I gotta be honest, I didn't know there were different kinds of editing. I always looked at editing like it was, help me make sure my grammar and punctuation was correct. But in fact, it's a lot more complicated than that when you start talking about a novel, right? Readers expect a novel to be a complete arc from beginning to end. They expect consistency throughout. If someone's hair was red in the first chapter and it turns purple in the third chapter, there better be an intervening thing that changes the hair color. Somebody walking around left-handed all of a sudden is right-handed. Those kind of inconsistency things are important. But then there's also just the arc. And so one of the things I learned about editors is the sort of the different types. And so we have a developmental edit or a developmental editor that's going to look at the structure of your story. I don't want to use the word structure. It's going to look at kind of the form, not the structure. I think form's a better way to look at it. That says basically, does this make a complete story? So the first time I published my book, it ended on a cliffhanger. Uh, and it was a horrible cliffhanger. It's like the worst cliffhanger you could be on. There was no sort of satisfaction in closing the story out, and that was a developmental problem in that it wasn't a comic book. You see the comic books over here. I love comic books, but I wasn't writing a comic book, right? If you're a reader of comic books, you kind of expect every comic to end on a cliffhanger, except maybe once every 6 or 7 where they close up a thread and start a new one. Well, that's kind of how I was thinking about writing my books, but that's not what I had. I had a novel, so it needed to end a certain way. And that's what your developmental editor is going to do. And I highly recommend, especially if you're a new writer, that you get developmental edits done because you just don't know what you don't know about an arc of a story. And so your developmental editor is going to go a long way to making that successful. Like you'll be a lot better writer that way. The next thing you have after you do a developmental edit, they'll come back and they'll tell you, this is good, this is bad, this is incomplete, add this part to the story, that kind of thing. The next is a structural edit, which is really more about the I'm going to say flow and function of your story. And I use the terms flow to just talk about is chapter 1 following 2, following 3, and function is, are you building suspense? So it's one thing for your chapters to be sequential, like in time or in development of someone, because you could have sort of back and forth from a flashbacks and that sort of stuff that's still moving, but you're trying to build an arc that goes up and ends in a decent climax. And so that structural edit is really about sequencing the story out. In my second book, Still Small Voice, I had a way I was moving from the main characters to the bad guy. Main character's bad guy, back and forth, back and forth. A lot like Star Wars, actually. Like that was my inspiration for it, was that in episode 4, like you see the good guys for a bit, and then you pan over to the Death Star for a while, and then the good guys in the Death Star. And that actually added to the suspense, right? Imagine if you hadn't seen the Empire blow up Alderaan before they flew into the asteroid belt that was Alderaan. It just would be a different story. But that's what happens in your structural edit. You can look for those kind of things where you're building the suspense. Is it building up the way it's supposed to? And the order and sequencing, does that make sense? So then, and sometimes your editor might combine the two, right? And especially the more proficient you get at writing, the less those are two separate tasks, right? Like as you get better, you don't necessarily need as much developmental work simply because you're better at that part of it, but you still need a structural edit to make sure that flow's good. They'll also find, inconsistencies in that along the way. The next bit that's pretty important is the line edit. And so when you think about the line edit, you're really looking at the you know line by line. Do you have commas, spaces? Does this paragraph make sense? Have you used the word, I don't know, leapt too many times? Like are you using your pronouns properly? Things like that. The line edit's really about getting it so that the story, you don't have these paragraphs that are just big long run-ons, or you don't have 7 pages of dialogue with no understanding of where the people are in the room. The line edit is really about that kind of thing. And it's super important. That's where a lot of the what do I want to say, the quality of your work gets improved quite a bit from that perspective. The next level, the final level, is really proofing. And I don't know, these days with tools like Grammarly out there or just the built-in spell check, grammar checker, and things like that, proofing's probably not as big of a deal as a secondary thing. But I know one self-published author, what they did was they basically left a thing at the end of the book saying, "Hey," or at the beginning of the book, "Hey, if you find errors in this, please send it to us." And then they went and kept reprinting their book as people, and they crowdsourced the proofing. And it's really important that you have all of your parts together. Like your sentences are complete and they're proofed. You know who didn't maybe get all the parts? Chewbacca. So when he was out on Bespin putting C3PO together, did you notice that C3PO and Return of the Jedi and Beyond never walked quite right? I think it's because Chewie must have lost some of the robotos. All right. So next, we're going to go on to covers, and covers is something that I'll just say I made major errors on. So if you're going to hire a professional editor, you should be getting covers, right? If you're going to spend money on it, because the cover is what really in these days in an Amazon ad and the way the search results and stuff come up, you need a cover that looks good, and it looks good at about this big. And so if you look at my first cover, which was, put together by my son. So this was, he did some good graphic design work for like a 12-year-old, but it's really not professional, right? This doesn't look professional. That doesn't look professional. You didn't even really fill up the page kind of thing. Not very good. And so, from that perspective, I thought I'd do better by, maybe contracting some people out, and I got some kids to dress up, and made a really awesome tinfoil shield and lit a sword on fire in my garage. That's some Photoshop there with the thing, but netted out, this is not really any better. In both cases, I was doing this myself. You really want to get a pre-made, either at least a pre-made, right? Like there are pre-made covers you can go buy. They can be really cheap, and still look great. But consider, doing a contract cover, getting someone that's a professional. I work with Magpie Designs. They make these amazing covers, right? This is the third cover of this book, and you can tell the difference. Like this book from across the room will bring kids over to look at it. Another big thing though about the cover is the marketing copy. So the actual words that go on the back of the cover, that go into your advertisements, that go into the Amazon page, all of that marketing copy is a whole other beast. And if you spent all your time learning how to write a good novel, it's a whole different thing to learn how to write marketing copy. So from that perspective, getting someone that knows how to do that is also very important. Part of the thing is I don't, and even to the point of, even if you're skilled at it, because I do this, professionally, I deal with marketing and sales, and I know the techniques around it. I still have someone else do my marketing copy because I'm so close to the work itself. I'm so close to how the book is written and that sort of stuff. It's hard to abstract it back to, I only have 200 characters to say this. Couple other people you could bring into your book process is a formatter, right? Your formatter is going to go make your pages look correct with things like your title on one side, your name on the other, page numbers, making sure your paragraphs flow and your chapters and things like that. They're really handy with desktop publishing tools. You can kind of do this yourself. Other stuff you might do as an illustrator, map makers, those kind of things. Those are all optional people I would consider in your work. But the net of it is there's a lot that goes into making it professional and look really good. And so I think the main thing to know is you're going to need a team if you're going to be successful. Now you may be able to kind of beg and borrow people to help you out along the way, and that's great, especially if they're professionals. But understand that that from a sales perspective, you're competing against people who have professional people to do their cover art, to do their editing. And so you can be very non-competitive if you don't have a team, because it just takes a team. So next week, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to be at the Great Homeschool Convention in St. Louis with tips and tricks on selling in person, because I'm going to be in person. I'm going to sell. And then after that, I'm going to talk about launch team members and other people you're going to need as a self-published author as you go along, professional, like an accountant. Speaking of an accountant, it's tax season. I got to thinking, have you ever noticed how Han Solo always wants to avoid imperial entanglements? I think he might have been worried about the Imperial Revenue Service. I hear he got his tax advice from CPAO. Catch you later.